Chapter 16. Cause and Effect. Proact. Don't react. If I had to sum up the objective of the alcoholic to alchemist philosophy in one sentence, it would read as follows: to transform a reactive person into a proactive person. The reactive. To react means to recycle old behavior in response to new experiences. When we react, we don't progress, we regress, repeatedly reverting to outdated modes of action. Let's remember, alcoholism and its escape mechanism used to escape a life that is deemed unbearable. If we continue to repeat old behavior, nothing will change. If you keep on doing what you've always done, you'll keep on getting what you've always got. W. L. Bateman. Reactive people are like ships caught in a storm, tossed and buffeted by the tides of life. Without the stabilizing force of a captain, they drift aimlessly. Each wave knocks them off balance, and they don't have time to recover before the next one arrives to deliver a crushing blow. They are apparently at the mercy of the turbulent surface of the ocean. But as we shall soon see, it is the undercurrents which pose the more serious problem. The word reactive implies lack of conscious control. Reactive people are driven by unconscious impulses, the undercurrents. Although we are powerful beings with the freedom to choose whatever we desire in life, our ability to exercise the faculty of choice is often thwarted by underlying mechanisms which override our conscious intent. When we react, dormant forces come alive and render us highly volatile. Like time bombs, we tick away, ready to explode in response to trivial situations. People inadvertently trigger these underlying forces and we attack them. But they are not to blame. The locus of the problem is situated firmly within ourselves. Our outbursts are triggered by processing the world through the lens of our history. The proactive. When we proact, we take the helm and set a course for our desired life. With our sails filled with wisdom and insight, we venture out to explore the infinite possibilities the ocean of life has to offer. This wonderful journey starts by fostering an attitude of curiosity and inquiry. Beneath the surface. The journey from alcoholic to alchemist is contingent on our ability to raise our self-awareness and identify the unconscious patterns that sabotage our lives. Many of our current relationships and interactions are negatively influenced by unconscious material. Have you ever flared up for no apparent reason and wondered what came over you? Or grossly overreacted to a somewhat trivial situation? If so, then you have probably experienced one of the primary unconscious processes responsible for major conflict in our lives. Transference. Countertransference, or shadow projection. This section is designed to heighten your awareness of these destructive mechanisms. Knowing others is wisdom. Knowing yourself is enlightenment. Lao Tzu. Transference. Transference is a Freudian term used to describe how we unconsciously assign feelings and attitudes that we had for significant figures in our early life to people in our life today. It can be defined as an unconscious phenomenon in which a person projects onto another person the attitudes, feelings, and desires originally linked to early relationships. Simply put, transference is the reenactment of past relationships in the present. The phenomenon is best explained through true life examples. Example 1. John's transference. John, 28, had been sober for 3 years. However, when he turned up for counseling, he'd been experiencing angry outbursts that were threatening his sobriety. His last flare-up happened when his partner, Sharon, went into hospital. He had been informed in advance, but this notice did little to reassure him. When he received the news, he erupted and smashed some furniture up. His response had frightened Sharon. When we first spoke, John was full of remorse and totally baffled as to why he'd erupted in this way. This wasn't the first time he had lost control. However, he reacted negatively to Sharon's absence on other occasions. But this time, the severity of his reaction had escalated to such an extent that he feared losing her. During his counseling, we identified some early experiences which explained his emotionally charged responses. His parents had divorced when he was 5 years old, and shortly after his father had been taken ill and hospitalized. No one had taken time to talk to the small child and explain what was happening. Consequently, John held his mother responsible for his father's absence and illness, believing her leaving was the cause. The psychological pain was so great that his defense systems had banished this experience to the realms of his unconscious until he came for counseling. He had no recollection of it whatsoever. It had been repressed. However, repressed material must find a means of expression. If we bury the cause, the effect will simply be delayed. In this case, as with many other cases, the internalized relationship was finding expression externally. When triggered by abandonment threats, John psychologically regressed to that 5-year-old child, and the relationship he had with his mother represented himself. On this last occasion, Sharon, who had inadvertently triggered these unresolved childhood issues, became a projection, a virtual incarnation of John's mother. The pent-up negative emotion John's 5-year inner child held for his mother was transferred onto Sharon, which explains the emotionally charged, irrational response to her leaving. John was unconsciously reenacting the relationship he had with his mother many years ago. These dynamics were happening at an unconscious level, so neither partner was aware of what was actually happening. As you can imagine, left unattended, these unconscious dynamics could have caused mayhem and ended up in divorce. After gaining these insights and processing the feelings surrounding his parents' breakup and the hospitalization of his father, John explained everything to Sharon. She was very understanding and extremely supportive. Subsequently, John's irrational behavior subsided, and the relationship blossomed. Epilogue. At the time of writing, John has been sober for 8 years, and the couple are currently expecting their second child. John found his therapy so enlightening and rewarding that he decided to train as a psychologist. Today, he has a very successful practice in London. Another tremendous success story. Example 2. Charlie's transference. Charlene, or Charlie, as she preferred to be called, had a history of alcoholism and violent behavior. She'd attended a number of anger management classes, but these had failed to quell her temper. When I asked her about the violence, she looked dumbfounded. "I don't know what to say," she answered despondently. "It frightens me. I feel powerless to stop it. I feel possessed." After a number of therapy sessions, we identified the trigger for Charlie's irrational outbursts. Rather than being haphazard or unpredictable, there was a pattern to them. Her violent disposition was triggered whenever a male raised his voice or acted in a condescending way towards her. Whilst exploring her history, the reason became quite apparent. Charlie had a violent father who beat her frequently. She had never spoken about her relationship with them until she came for therapy. Consequently, the experience had been buried deep in her unconscious. Whenever a male acted in a manner she perceived as condescending or threatening, her repressed relationship with her father flared up and found expression, though reenactment with unsuspecting males. Rather than acting objectively to these men, seeing them as real people, she experienced them unconsciously as virtual incarnations of her father. Hence, the pent-up emotion she felt for her father was transferred onto them. During the subsequent counseling sessions, I helped Charlie to process the pent-up emotions she had for her father. Week after week, she broke down and sobbed, something she hadn't done for years. This cathartic release eventually resulted in her anger dissipating, and there were no more violent outbursts. In addition, Charlie gained an understanding of why her father beat her. He was subjected to the same rites of passage when he was a child, and was acting out what he had learned from his own parents. On discovering this, Charlie, who hadn't seen her father in years, made contact with him. Epilogue. Charlie is currently 5 years sober. Her relationship with her once estranged father continues to improve on a daily basis. Charlie is now in the second year of an honors degree in performing arts. The success stories go on and on. Countertransference. The counterpart of transference is a phenomenon known as countertransference. When a person becomes the object of transference, it can tap into their own unresolved issues and result in a reaction. This reaction is termed countertransference. For example, it is a reaction that counters or opposes transference. None of us are exempt from countertransference. We are all capable of displacing feelings from our past onto other people. During my sessions with Charlie, I became the object of transference. She occasionally and unconsciously, of course, transferred anger associated with her father onto me. Initially, I felt a reaction to her barrage of abuse. I felt a built-up of anger inside of myself in retaliation. As she directed the unresolved pent-up emotions she held for her father towards me, her behavior started to trigger my own unresolved issues. For example, activated my countertransference. Under different circumstances or even violence, such flare-ups are common in everyday life and often spiral out of control. However, as a trained counselor, I was very aware of my countertransference and used it to gain insight into the relationship Charlie had with her father. The way in which to disperse countertransference is to depersonalize the abuse that is directed our way. Recognize that in some way, you remind the perpetrator of a significant person in their past. Another extremely important point to highlight is that countertransference does not always manifest as a verbal or emotional attack, as the following example shows. Example: Ron's countertransference. Ron was a psychiatric nurse, specializing in addiction counseling. He was surprised by the strength of his response to one of his clients. When he was a child, his parents were neglectful and dependent on alcohol. As a teenager, he experimented with drugs and alcohol too. From an early age, he had learned to fend for himself, cooking and shopping whenever there was money to do so. One of his current clients, a middle-aged man, had been addicted to alcohol for many years. Some of this client's characteristics reminded him of his father. Ron found himself taking care of his client in ways which were professionally inappropriate. For example, worrying about him and giving him advice. On other occasions, he had strong negative feelings towards him. These mixed emotions mirrored the positive and negative feelings he had towards his father. Ron's example shows that transference and countertransference can manifest in a variety of ambiguous guises, not just aggression or violence. Here are a few more common examples. Seeing people as helpless or victims. This highlights a need to be in control. Inability to confront or disagree. This may stem from a fear of being disliked or being seen as incompetent. In competition or envious. This may relate to childhood problems with siblings and parents. To conclude our discussion on transference and countertransference, just remember, if you find yourself acting in ways that impede your ability to relate healthily to others, ways that threaten your cherished relationships, Go within and investigate your past. Transference and countertransference are often responsible for disturbing our equilibrium. The subsequent despair can easily lead to a need to escape via the bottle. Transference and countertransference are both reactive. Don't be an effect of past conditioning. You were endowed with the capacity to achieve great things. Be causal and make them happen. Shadow projection. We still attribute to the other fellow all the evil and inferior qualities that we do not like to recognize in ourselves, and therefore have to criticize and attack him, when all that has happened is that an inferior soul has emigrated from one person to another. The world is still full of bêtes noirs and scapegoats, just as it formerly teemed with witches and werewolves. C.J. Jung. Shadow projection is a defense mechanism employed by the ego, a process whereby one's own perceived shortcomings are seen as being situated in other people. In order to maintain its status, the ego disowns anything which threatens its standing in the community. For example, jealousy, anger, laziness, intolerance, self-centeredness, selfishness, deceit, and greed, which are all aspects of our shadow. Instead of owning these shadow elements, the ego projects them onto other people, turning a personal inferiority into a perceived moral deficiency in someone else. The unsuspecting person, the scapegoat, is then attacked and criticized. By disowning our faults and attributing them to other people, we cling onto the infected energy that clouds our judgments and destroys our relationships. Let's not forget, the external world is a reflection of our state of mind. If we find ourselves casting aspersions into some unsuspecting person for no reason other than to bolster our false sense of superiority, then it is probable that we are projecting our own flaws onto them. If we are wise, we will use this insight to gain self-knowledge and change the character defects that impede our growth. Don't project, introspect. Blame is a futile practice. When we deny our shortcomings and project them onto others, we cocoon ourselves in a shell of darkness. Shadow projections insulate and cripple individuals by forming an ever-thickening fog of illusion between them and the real world. When this occurs, their personal world becomes a hostile place to be. Consequently, escape is sought, and escape normally leads back to the bottle. So, nip it in the bud. The next time you find yourself criticizing someone, try to connect with the part of your shadow that is making the critical judgment. For example, my partner always wants to be right and she never listens. Be very honest with yourself. Is there a part of you that always wants to be right? Are you projecting your own defects onto your partner? By employing this practice regularly, you will increase your awareness of those parts of yourself that need work. We may not always like the truth, but don't be hard on yourself. Don't treat it as criticism. Treat it as feedback. In this way, the external world becomes an excellent teacher, reflecting back the character defects we need to alleviate in order to reach our true potential. People who cast aspersions usually define themselves, not others. As well as being mindful of occasions when you are projecting your flaws and defects onto others, there will also be occasions when others project their shortcomings onto you. If you are not mindful of this phenomenon, it can all be too easy to internalize your aspersions. Remember the concept of self. The idea of who we think we are is constructed in accordance with the messages we internalize from other people. Although this is more prevalent during our formative years, if we are of a volatile disposition, these messages can still deeply affect us in adulthood. Therefore, we need to reject the shadow projections of other people and recognize them for what they are, an attempt to purge themselves of their flaws and shortcomings at our expense, a diluted way of trying to elevate their status. When we find ourselves a target of unwarranted defamatory remarks, we must realize that the perpetrators are not defining us. They are defining themselves. When people project their character defects onto us and attempt to use us as scapegoats, they define themselves, not us. Egoic consciousness and the possessive tendency. Before leaving the subject of cause and effect, let's examine the way in which our ego is apt to disempower us and render us an effect of the competitive society we live in. At the egoic level of consciousness, we experience ourselves as separate and distinct from others. Isolated egos defined by the boundaries of our bodies. From this divided state, all conflict is born. The prevailing sense of separateness gives rise to a competitive and possessive culture, obsessed with a desire for power, position, and prestige, an ethos that breeds conflict of every form. Vindicativeness, antagonism, brutality, manipulation, jealousy, and so on. The ego is volatile, demanding, competitive, and possessive. In an attempt to elevate its status, it expends vital energy on manipulation, grievances, judgments, comparisons, criticism, and other futile energy-draining activities. The ego's sense of worth is primarily derived from other people's perceived character defects and shortcomings. By casting aspersions on others, however, we inadvertently emphasize our own insecurities and inferiority. Now, couple this with another psychological phenomenon, the fact that whatever our mind focuses on expands, and the connotations become disturbing. If you are intent on verbally annihilating others to inflate your false sense of self, then be prepared to dig two graves. Perceiving your character defects in others is self-effacing. Egoic consciousness is ambiguous. If life unfolds in accordance with your possessive and demanding nature, if people say this or do that, if external circumstances meet with approval, then all is well. If not, then some derisory strategy must be implemented to ensure that all offenders are punished. This mode of operation bears no fruits. The locus of power is constantly placed outside yourself, and you are demoted to a mere effect of other people's behavior and opinions. Each grievance is a declaration of disempowerment. You are being reactive, not proactive. The shift in thinking necessary for contentment and happiness is thus demanded of everyone and everything, except yourself. Conducting your life on this basis is futile. You are powerless over other people. Ultimately, the locus of every conceivable problem can be found within yourself. To fully accept this is truly liberating. Eradicating jealousy. Egoic consciousness and the possessive tendency give rise to perhaps the most corrosive emotion of all, jealousy. Jealousy obliterates all our good qualities. It can make us sick, disturb our sleep, and upset our appetite. Jealousy propels us to attack others, but it serves only to destroy us. So long as we have jealousy, we will never shine. Jealousy propels us to attack others, but it only serves to destroy us. Jealousy takes away our peace of mind and invites relapse. It cannot be relieved by reading books or attending meditations. We have to make a conscious effort to eradicate it. Simply put, jealousy is a secondary emotion evoked when we experience hostility towards a rival or someone believed to enjoy an advantage. Most people abhor the feeling and try to cover it up, but camouflaged jealousy is akin to venom. It slowly poisons the mind. A growing sense of inferiority gives rise to an increased tendency to be manipulative, scheming, and possessive. The results are often catastrophic. Jealousy wrecks relationships. The sad fact is that most of this destruction is unnecessary. In majority of cases, the issue in question is often imaginary, a fabrication of a mind infested with inferiority, plagued by paranoia, and swamped by suspicion. When jealousy arises, don't delude yourself into seeking resolution in the external world. Don't blame others. Blame is simply an argument against growth. Take a good look within and identify your source of self-doubt and insecurity. Jealousy is usually the result of one of the following core beliefs. I'm inferior to, I'm not worthy of, I'm not capable of attaining, I don't possess the necessary resources or attributes. The clue to the antidote lies in the opening word of these sentences. I'm. Any sentence starting with the words I am or I'm appertains to the ego. The ego is simply a mental construct comprised of labels, roles, and beliefs. As a result, it is a highly volatile and easily influenced by the good opinions of others. Throughout the course of our lives, people try to elevate their own status by putting us down and berating us, normally as a result of their own inferiority complexes. Our ego can either reject or accept these opinions. When it accepts them, they transform into corrosive inner dialogue and breed low self-esteem and inferiority within us. Low self-esteem and inferiority are the main ingredients of jealousy. When we believe we are less than others in some way, we feel disempowered. In order to claw back our power, we become manipulative, scheming, and highly controlling. We try to fix the problem externally, but this is simply a waste of time. Others are not to blame. We feel inferior because of the accumulative effect of the negative messages we have internalized throughout the course of our lives. We have accepted the good opinions of others irrespective of their suitability to give them. Suggestions for alleviating jealousy. Accept that the issues causing jealousy are in you, not in somebody else. With the locus of the problem placed firmly within yourself, you have the power to resolve it. Don't fall into the trap of manipulating others to solve the problem. You will end up frustrated and disillusioned. We don't have the power to change others, only ourselves. Every problem can be overcome by changing ourselves. No other person can make you feel any way. You feel the way you do by virtue of how you interpret experience. Jealousy normally results by virtue of how we perceive things, not as a result of how they truly are. Honest communication is often a great help. Talking clarifies issues that are open to misinterpretation. When talking to the object of your jealousy, for example, partner or friend, refrain from using blame-loaded language. You made me feel awful. You are up to no good. You don't care for me. Use language that acknowledges that the locus of the problem is within you. I feel insecure because. I feel inferior because. This usually takes courage, but you will feel liberated and lighter. When jealousy arises, make it conscious. Allow the feeling to expand and simply observe the sensations in your body. Take a spectator's perspective. Remind yourself that the sensations you're experiencing have resulted from the cumulative effect of past issues that filled you with insecurity and inferiority. Allow the feelings to dissipate and reevaluate the situation at hand. Challenge the authenticity of your thoughts. Do they have any credence? Or are they simply fabricated distortions of your mind? Are you jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, or personalizing? Direct your awareness to your attributes. Instead of focusing on the situation in question, recognize the good in you and harness it. Remember the last time you felt full of confidence. Hear what you heard, see what you saw, and feel what you felt. Let the experience expand 100-fold in your mind. Hear people paying you compliments. You're so caring. You're so thoughtful. You're so funny, etc. See them in your mind's eye and internalize their positive perspective of you. Develop independence. Relying on your family, friends, or partner for self-esteem is demanding and suffocating. Evoke self-esteem intrinsically. Developing autonomy and creating a healthy distance will enhance your relationships. Develop an attitude of trust. Relinquish control and concentrate on your positive attributes. Evoke self-esteem intrinsically. Summary: transference, countertransference, and shadow projection are three unconscious mechanisms that can severely hinder our relationships. Being aware of their manifestations can prevent their negative influence from creating conflict and turmoil in your cherished relationships. Own your character defects and shortcomings and transform them into attributes. Do not disown them by projecting them onto others. That will simply promote stasis. Jealousy destroys us. Whenever it descends, recognize it as insecurity within yourself. Focus on developing your self-esteem and worth, and watch it magically dissipate.